Anika Sharma, the beautiful young bride with a hidden hunger for wealth, and Richard Cole, the powerful Texas oil tycoon with a dangerous temper. When their worlds collided, love turned into a deadly game of lies, betrayal, and fatal revenge. Anika Sharma grew up in a modest neighborhood where dreams were often limited by money and tradition. Her father was a small shopkeeper, and her mother worked tirelessly to keep the family afloat. From a young age, Anika understood that her beauty drew attention. People admired her striking features and confidence, and she soon realized she could use it as a tool. While other girls in her town planned for arranged marriages within the community, Anika imagined a life far away from narrow streets and constant financial struggle. She wanted wealth, freedom, and power, and she was willing to take risks that others wouldn't dare. When she turned 20, Anika discovered matrimonial websites that connected Indian women to foreign men looking for traditional brides. To many, it seemed like a chance for a better life through honest marriage, but for her, it was a perfect opportunity to create a future built on manipulation. She carefully crafted profiles that highlighted her innocence and loyalty. She used simple language, spoke of family values, and presented herself as a woman who wanted nothing more than to be a supportive wife. Behind the screen, however, she was calculating each step, noting which men appeared lonely, wealthy, or vulnerable. Her first success came quickly. A middle-aged businessman from California fell in love with the charming, soft-spoken woman who promised to make him happy. Their wedding was small but elegant, and Anika played her role flawlessly. For a few weeks, she cooked, smiled, and fulfilled every expectation of a devoted bride. But once she had access to his money and documents, she began setting the stage for her disappearance. Claiming she was mistreated, she left suddenly, filing for legal support and securing a portion of his wealth. To the businessman, it was heartbreak. To Anika, it was only the beginning. With the money from her first marriage, she grew bolder. She improved her wardrobe, polished her English, and refined her online persona. Each new profile was more convincing than the last. Soon, wealthy American men saw her not just as a wife, but as a dream, an exotic woman who valued family and tradition in a way they longed for. They didn't know that Anika was rehearsing the same act she had perfected once before. Every marriage was another step in her climb out of poverty, another mask she wore with ease. She left no trail of affection, only broken promises and shattered trust. What seemed like love to her husbands was nothing more than a carefully staged performance. To Anika, the role of the perfect bride wasn't about happiness. It was about survival, power, and the thrill of winning a game no one knew she was playing. With the success of her first marriage scheme, Anika realized she had stumbled upon a strategy that could change her life forever. She was no longer the young girl from a poor Indian neighborhood. She was now a woman with a plan and the confidence to execute it. Each scam became more sophisticated than the last. She learned the loopholes of immigration, studied how the legal system worked, and understood exactly how to portray herself as the victim when the time came to leave. For every husband, she created a new identity. Sometimes she was the shy, submissive wife, other times the devoted caretaker who only wanted a family. Every version of Anika was believable because she rehearsed her lies like a script. The money started to flow steadily. One husband bought her a luxury car, another added her name to his bank account, and another showered her with expensive jewelry. She never stayed too long, never enough for them to realize they were being used. She would disappear suddenly, often after staging small arguments or hinting at abuse. In court, her carefully built story painted her as a wronged woman abandoned by men who had promised her security. Judges granted her financial settlements, and in some cases, she walked away with far more than she had ever dreamed possible. Her growing fortune allowed her to live two lives. In America, she was the glamorous young wife who attended parties on the arms of wealthy men. In India, she returned as a mysterious success story, staying in expensive hotels and keeping her past hidden even from family. No one knew where her money came from, and she preferred it that way. The fewer questions asked, the better. Her manipulative charm was so effective that she never ran out of men willing to marry her. Loneliness, and the allure of a devoted Indian bride blinded them to the dangers ahead. But as her scams multiplied, so did the risks. Several of her abandoned husbands hired lawyers and private investigators. Her name began to appear in different cases across states, raising suspicions. A few investigators noticed the same pattern: a young Indian bride, a whirlwind romance, sudden departure, and financial loss. Yet none had enough evidence to tie her down completely. Anika believed she was untouchable, but the cracks were beginning to form. Her greed pushed her forward, convincing her that she could always outsmart the system. What she did not realize was that her growing trail of betrayal was slowly leading her toward a man who would not fall into her trap so easily. Richard Cole was unlike anyone Anika had targeted before. A self-made oil tycoon from Texas, he carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from decades of wealth and power. He was in his late 50s, rugged, commanding, and feared by many who worked under him. Yet beneath his strong exterior was a man who longed for companionship. His first marriage had ended in bitterness, and his children were distant. When he discovered Anika's profile online, she seemed to be everything he wanted: youthful, loyal, and eager to build a family. To him, she represented a second chance at happiness. To her, he was the ultimate prize, a man with more wealth and influence than any of her previous husbands. Their wedding was extravagant, held in a sprawling Texas estate filled with influential guests and lavish displays of wealth. Anika wore diamonds that sparkled under the lights, and she moved gracefully through the crowd, playing her role to perfection. Everyone admired Richard's choice, whispering that the tycoon had finally found a woman who softened his rough edges. For a while, Anika seemed genuinely settled, enjoying her new mansion, luxury cars, and staff who catered to her every need. But old habits die hard. She began digging through Richard's accounts, carefully testing the waters to see how she could position herself for another exit. Richard, however, was no fool. He had built his empire by recognizing deception in business deals, and soon he started noticing the same patterns in his wife. She avoided questions about her family, her education, and even her past jobs. She slipped when telling stories, sometimes contradicting herself without realizing it. His suspicions grew, and instead of confronting her immediately, he quietly hired a private investigator. Within weeks, the investigator uncovered a trail of failed marriages, lawsuits, and missing husbands who all shared the same story of betrayal. Armed with the evidence, Richard kept his composure, pretending to remain the doting husband while planning his next steps. He watched Anika carefully, studying her movements, her excuses, and her attempts to manipulate him. For the first time in her schemes, she was dealing with a man who not only saw through her lies, but had the resources and temperament to turn the game against her. What Anika thought would be her most rewarding marriage was quickly becoming her most dangerous one. She had chosen the wrong man to deceive, and his silence was not a sign of ignorance, but a warning of the storm that was about to come. The trip to Richard's ranch began like a scene from one of Anika's well-rehearsed fantasies. He spoke of it as a private retreat, a chance for them to escape the noise of society and enjoy each other's company under the wide Texas sky. The sprawling property stretched for miles, surrounded by fences and open fields that seemed to vanish into the horizon. To outsiders, it was a romantic gesture, a husband treating his young wife to solitude and luxury. To Anika, it felt slightly unsettling. The isolation meant she was far from anyone who could hear her if something went wrong, but she dismissed the thought. Richard had always been generous, and she assumed this was simply another display of his wealth. That evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows spread across the ranch, Anika made her move. While Richard stepped outside, she slipped into his study, her fingers scrolling through his computer and rifling through drawers in search of financial records. She had done it many times before with other husbands, but this time she was met with a surprise. The files she opened revealed not only his accounts but also detailed folders about her, copies of marriage records, photographs from her past weddings, and notes from investigators that chronicled her years of deception. Her heart pounded as the realization sank in. He knew everything. Richard entered quietly, his tall frame filling the doorway. In his hand was a stack of papers he had been waiting to confront her with. The calmness in his eyes was more terrifying than rage. One by one, he laid out the evidence on the desk, watching as her carefully constructed facade began to crumble. For the first time, Anika was cornered, unable to spin a lie convincing enough to escape. What happened next was brutal and swift. The man she had underestimated for weeks let years of betrayal, humiliation, and anger explode in one violent moment. On that remote ranch, far away from the world she had manipulated so easily, Anika's life came to a sudden end. Her body was left in the harsh Texas landscape, hidden beneath the same soil that had made Richard powerful. For him, it wasn't just about revenge for his own betrayal. It was a final act of justice on behalf of the men who had fallen victim before him. What she believed would be her richest conquest turned out to be the stage for her downfall, and the ranch became the silent witness to the end of her dangerous game. When Anika's sudden disappearance was first reported, it did not immediately raise alarms. Friends and neighbors believed she had simply left Richard the way she had left other husbands before, vanishing without explanation. Richard himself played the role of the worried husband, telling police she had gone missing during their stay at the ranch. For weeks he maintained his story, even hiring search parties to comb the surrounding land, but the calmness in his behavior, coupled with whispers about his temper, kept suspicion close by. Detectives began to look more carefully, and soon cracks in his version of events appeared. The first break in the case came from Richard's own private investigator, the same man he had once hired to uncover Anika's past. Realizing the danger of being linked to a cover-up, the investigator provided authorities with detailed records of Anika's history and his findings on Richard's growing anger toward her. Combined with testimony from staff who noticed unusual burnings of documents and late-night activity at the ranch, the puzzle began to take shape. Police obtained warrants and combed the property thoroughly. Beneath the vast fields of the estate, they uncovered traces of blood in the soil, charred fragments of clothing, and a shallow grave that told the story Richard had tried to bury. The trial that followed drew enormous media attention. The courtroom was divided. Some painted Anika as a manipulative criminal who destroyed lives for greed, while others saw her as a young woman who had been consumed by her own ambition and trapped by choices too dangerous to sustain. Richard's defense argued that he acted in a fit of passion after discovering her deception, but the evidence of planning and concealment weighed heavily against him. In the end, his wealth and influence could not shield him from justice. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. The case shocked both America and India, sparking debates about arranged marriages, online scams, and the dangers of unchecked ambition. Families of Anika's previous husbands expressed relief that her schemes had finally been exposed, though they were haunted by the devastation she had left behind. For Richard, prison became the final chapter of his legacy, a fall from power that mirrored the empire he had once ruled with authority. For Anika, her story ended as a cautionary tale, a reminder that lies and greed can create temporary victories but often pave the road to a violent downfall. Her deadly game had finally claimed its last victim, herself.